Okay, so culturally, how do you think our the general population, how do you think people deal with disgust?
I think kind of trying to talk ourselves out of it.
Oh, really? I was going to go the opposite.
Yeah. Well, it depends what it's about, you know.
Well, and with it being that gut thing, I think sometimes we tell ourselves, like, nope, your gut's wrong. This is a fine situation. That person's really nice. They're not toxic. Don't feel that.
But
like,
I also think in pop culture, especially, like, the first thing that came to mind was Jimmy Fallon's "ew" skit.
Ew.
oh, funny.
And just how we use that kind of phrasing of like "ew,"
You.
like,
Or somebody's creeping.
gross.
That person's
Yeah.
creeping
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Creeping on.
Totally.
And so those like gut checks we actually pay a lot of attention to, but we don't, like, it's more of like yeah, and we move away instead of I'm uncomfortable because this brings up some sexual things from my history.
Right.
Like that,
Right.
we don't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
We
So
run away from
we
that.
run quickly. And I think, but I also think sometimes will happen, you know, like, you know, and a person's like in an, you know, an abusive cycle.
Sure.
That there's that conflicting information. Says it's safe, acts in a way that it's not.
Not safe. Yeah.
And I want it to be, so I sometimes will ignore my disgust
Totally.
and go
Engage, move
engage,
in.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think what Trevor was kind of talking about is that idea that you were sharing at the end of, like, pause, like, wait a minute and think through, like, why am I feeling this way? Before we choose to make any type of movement, we got to, like, sit with it for a minute and figure out, okay, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? Where does this come from? You know.
Yeah, and even label it. And
Exactly.
everybody's got acronyms. I was thinking about one, because I had a couple extra minutes in the car. I was thinking flute. Feel it, label it, understand it, think about it, and execute your plan.
Whoa, that's so good. Hold on, flute. Wow. That's a lot, but it's like so good. You were in education, weren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Feel it.
Feel it, label it,
Label it. Understand it. Think about it. And engage with it.
engage or execute. Yeah.
I feel like that in general for any
Pretty much
emotion
yeah.
is so good, but specifically with some of the more negative
Yes.
ones because we
want to run from them.
Yeah, we push back.
But it's
so
not.
much.
I mean, but it is also important to actually do that with the positive ones, and some of us perfectionists can avoid that too. Like
I hear that. I hear that. Yeah, it's fine. It's great.
Yes, yeah. No time to be proud.
Totally.
Should have done better.
Totally.
Can you talk a little bit about internal disgust?
Yeah, like with yourself. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think that one's interesting. I don't know exactly how that one goes, but internal disgust is like, I think it can be kind of related to shame.
For sure.
I just I hate what I did.
Yeah.
And shame, you know, we don't think about as a useful emotion, but
Right.
but there is that sense of, I would like a do-over, you know, and if I had the chance to do that over, I would distance myself from that toxic thing that maybe I did, or
Right.
that thing that maybe hurt someone else or kind of hurt myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think that's spot on. I think I would never consciously correlate disgust and shame when I hear those two together.
Yeah.
But when you really start to think
like,
about that disgust piece, and when we turn that in on ourselves and think about ourselves that way, like, shame is right there.
Well, and when I think about something I might feel shame about, sometimes my nose will wrinkle.
Totally. Or you get that, like, feeling in your guts.
Yeah,
Totally.
and sometimes our body helps us know what we're feeling. You know,
Absolutely.
I think that's why it's so important to be in tune with the body. And it's something I mean, it's not easy. We're not taught to do that.
Good grief, no.
No.
Yeah.
Don't mess with that.
I know.
Yeah.
But yet it's like key. It
Yeah.
is so key
Yeah.
to identifying those things.
You know, and it's so interesting. How often have you asked a person, you know, how are you feeling? I don't know, but they can tell you what they're thinking.
Yep, totally.
And I'm talking about myself as well.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm really learning.
Absolutely. Sometimes I'll ask my clients, like, where do you feel that in your body? And they're like,
What?
I don't know. And then I kind of start to give them examples of other feelings you might feel in your body, and then they can get there. But it's not a natural thing for us.
It's also personal. That we have some things in common, like with disgust. Our stomach might tighten up, because those are the things that are going to prevent us from taking in that toxicity.
Yeah.
But we might feel anxiousness or disgust in like the throat. We might feel it in the back of our neck. I mean, people feel it in different places. So it's kind of, we got to know our own body.
Yeah.
You can't just read about somebody else's
Yeah,
experience.
I think it's definitely relative. And I think that applies to a few other emotions that we've talked about, but it is a little bit relative to our experiences and how we choose to engage with those emotions, for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think about, I want to talk about the idea of like disgust on a more global scale. So we talked about it kind of in general, we talked about it in ourselves. And so when you like really look at it on a global spectrum, is it okay to experience disgust maybe in a really bigger way than just...
Well, and absolutely, and I think that's a great point, because there could be like an outrage about a situation that's going on. It could even be a societal thing. Exactly. And we're seeing this is a toxic societal thing. And you know, a great example of that is some of the kind of overt and horrendous acts of racism that we've looked at and we've seen, and it's presented to us, and some of it's like, ew, that it just feels toxic and wrong. And so I agree. I think it could be something personal and internal, but it could also be addressing something really big, something big that's cultural, societal.
Yeah, in a bigger systemic way. I was actually thinking about that very concept, and I have noticed my own personal response to somebody expressing their disgust for something like that. And to be really honest and open, like I had a really negative reaction to somebody feeling disgust about a really big kind of societal issue. And so I think
you didn't want to hear about their disgust.
Yeah, but I think it's really important to talk about maybe how other people respond to our emotions, specifically disgust, or how we might respond to other people's emotions. And honestly, I don't like that was my response, because their expression of disgust is perfectly acceptable, and likely I probably agreed with the concept that they were talking about, but I noticed my reaction was really like, ooh, of them.
Julie, that's a great point. I think we're all more comfortable with positive and pleasant emotions. I mean, they're just, in you, I feel more comfortable when you're happy.
Yeah.
And when you're feeling disgust, I'm not quite as comfortable, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. How do you think that we can address that within ourselves? Obviously, I cannot ask somebody to respond differently when I'm having emotions, but how do you think that we can challenge ourselves to maybe shift and engage differently with that?
You know, I think a good example is, I caught myself, I started to say negative emotions, and sometimes I do, but if we could say, instead of negative emotions, we could say unpleasant.
Yeah.
Because they're not negative. I mean, they're useful, they're helpful. But I think we've sort of conditioned ourselves culturally to that unpleasant is bad. It's a negative emotion that I want to get rid of. Right? Bad, negative. So I want to get away from that. And but really, sometimes we've got to lean into that unpleasant emotion. So I think just something like unpleasant instead, say unpleasant instead of
it
bad,
being bad,
or negative.
Yep. No, I think that's great. And I think that's something that I want to challenge you guys to do, is even think about the way that you talk about emotions. So many of us believe they're good and they're bad, when really that's not the case. They're either pleasant or unpleasant. And so if we can even start to change some of that language inside of ourselves, and even just start to notice how we respond to other people's big emotions or unpleasant emotions or whatever it might be, and recognize that, because I can't change my responses to people until I recognize, oh, I didn't like the response I had to their unpleasant emotion. So that's what I want you guys to do, is just think about it. Think about how you naturally engage, and think about maybe some different ways that you can push in. And follow along on Clark's little alliteration, the flute. I'm not going to go through it because it's going to take me forever. But thank you for joining us in this discussion of disgust. I think it's really, really important and beneficial.